Kiala as their ruler. I had anticipated we should be able at once to cross the river, but difficulties arose. We were told to camp before any negotiations could be entered into. When we demurred, we were informed that we might cross the river if we wished, but we should not be assisted in any way by any Mvinza. Being compelled to halt for this day, the tent was pitched in the middle of one of the villages, and the bales were stored in one of the huts, with 4 soldiers to guard them. After dispatching an embassy to Kiala, eldest son of the great chief Nzogera, to request permission to cross the river as a peaceable caravan, Kiala sent word that the white men should cross his river after the payment of 56 cloths. 56 cloths signified a bale nearly. Here was another opportunity for diplomacy. Bombay and Asmani were empowered to treat Kiala about the honga, but it was not to exceed 25 doti. At 6 a.m., having spoken for 7 hours, the 2 men returned, with the demand for 13 doti for Nzogera and 10 doti for Kiala. Poor Bombay was hoarse, but Asmani still smiled, and I relented, congratulating myself that the preposterous demand, which was simply robbery, was no worse. 3 hours later, another demand was made. Kiala had been visited by a couple of chiefs from his father, and the chiefs being told that a white man was at the ferry, put in a claim for a couple of guns and a keg of gunpowder. But here my patience was exhausted, and I declared that they should have to take them by force, for I would never consent to be robbed and despoiled after any such fashion. Until 11 p.m., Bombay and Asmani were negotiating about this extra demand, arguing, quarreling, threatening, until Bombay declared they would talk him mad if it lasted much longer. I told Bombay to take 2 cloths, 1 for each chief, and if they did not consider it enough, then I should fight. The present was taken, and the negotiations were terminated at midnight. November 2nd, Ihata Island, 1½ hour west of Kiala's. We arrived before the island of Ihata, on the left bank of the Malagarazi, at 5 p.m., the morning having been wasted in puerile talk with the owner of the canoes at the ferry. The final demand for ferriage across was 8 yards of cloth and 4 fundo of sami sami, or red beads, which was at once paid. 4 men, with their loads, were permitted to cross in the small, unshapely, and cranky canoes. When the boatmen had discharged their canoes of their passengers and cargoes, they were ordered to halt on the other side, and, to my astonishment, another demand was made. The ferryman had found that 2 fundo of these were of short measure, and 2 fundo more must be paid, otherwise the contract for ferrying us across would be considered null and void. So 2 fundo more were added, but not without demur and much talk, which in these lands is necessary. 4 fundo equals 40 necklaces, 1 fundo being 10 necklaces. 3 times the canoe went backwards and forwards, when lo! another demand was made, with the usual clamour and fierce wordy dispute. This time for 5 kehete for the man who guided us to the ferry, a shuka of cloth for a babbler, who had attached himself to the old womanish Juma, who did nothing but babble and increase the clamour. These demands were also settled. About sunset we endeavoured to cross the donkeys. Simba, a fine, wild Kinyamwezi donkey, went in first, with a rope attached to his neck. He had arrived in the middle of the stream when we saw him begin to struggle. A crocodile had seized him by the throat. The poor animal's struggles were terrific. Chowpereh was dragging on the rope with all his might, but to no use, for the donkey sank, and we saw no more of him. The depth over the river at this place was about 15 feet. We had seen the light brown heads, the glittering eyes, and the ridgy backs hovering about the vicinity, but we had never thought that the reptiles would advance so near to such an exciting scene as the vicinity of the ferry presented during the crossing. Saddened by this loss, we resumed our work, and by 7 p.m. we were all across, excepting Bombay and the only donkey now left, which was to be brought across in the morning when the crocodile should have deserted the river. November 3rd. What contention have we not been witness to these last 3 days! What anxiety have we not suffered ever since our arrival at Uvinza! The Wavinza are worse than the Wagogo, and their greed is more insatiable. We got the donkey across with the aid of Maganga, or medicine men, who spat some chewed leaves of a tree which grows close to the stream over him. He informed me he could cross the river at any time, day or night, after rubbing his body with these chewed leaves, which he believed to be the most potent medicine. About 10 a.m. appeared from the direction of Ujiji a caravan of 80 Wagaha, a tribe which occupies a tract of country on the southwestern side of the Lake Tanganyika. We asked the news, and were told a white man had just arrived at Ujiji from Manyuema. This news startled us all. "A white man?" we asked. "Yes, a white man," they replied. "How is he dressed?" "Like the master," they answered, referring to me. "Is he young or old?" "He is old. He has white hair on his face, and is sick." "Where has he come from?" "From a very far country away beyond Uguha, called Manyuema." "Indeed! And is he stopping at Ujiji now?" "Yes, we saw him about 8 days ago." "Do you think he will stop there until we see him?" "Sigu." Don't know. "Was he ever at Ujiji before?" "Yes, he went away a long time ago." "Hurrah! This is Livingstone. He must be Livingstone. He can be no other. But still, he may be someone else. Someone from the west coast. Or perhaps he is Baker. No, Baker has no white hair on his face. But we must now march quick, lest he hears we are coming, and runs away." I addressed my men, and asked them if they were willing to march to Ujiji without a single halt, and then promised them, if they acceded to my wishes, 2 doti to each man. All answered in the affirmative, almost as much rejoiced as I was myself. But I was madly rejoiced, intensely eager to resolve the burning question, "Is it Dr. Livingstone?" God grant me patience, but I do wish there was a railroad, or at least horses, in this country. We set out at once from the banks of the Malagarazi, accompanied by 2 guides furnished us by Usenji, the old man of the ferry, who, now that we had crossed, showed himself more amiably disposed to us. We arrived at the village of Asinga, Sultan Katalambula, after a little over an hour's march across a saline plain, but which as we advanced into the interior became fertile and productive. November 4th. Started early with great caution, maintaining deep silence. The guides were sent forward, one 200 yards ahead of the other, that we might be warned in time. The first part of the march was through a thin jungle of dwarf trees, which got thinner and thinner until it vanished altogether, and we had entered Uha, a plain country. Villages were visible by the score among the tall bleached stalks of doura and maize. Sometimes 3, sometimes 5, 10, or 20 beehive-shaped huts formed a village. The Waha were evidently living in perfect security, for not one village amongst them all was surrounded with the customary defence of an African village. A narrow dry ditch formed the only boundary between Uha and Uvinza. On entering Uha, all danger from Makumba vanished. We halted at Kawanga, the chief of which lost no time in making us understand that he was the great Mutware of Kameni under the king, and that he was the tribute gatherer for his Kia Majesty. He declared that he was the only one in Kameni, an eastern division of Uha, who could demand tribute, and that it would be very satisfactory to him, and a saving of trouble to ourselves, if we settled his claim of 12 doti of good cloth at once. We did not think it the best way of proceeding, knowing as we did the character of the native African, so we at once proceeded